It has been said that sports information directors are the storytellers behind the stats, preserving history, shaping narratives, and making sure every athlete's moment is remembered. Let's talk about the stories behind the stats on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have a fellow sports information director with me, Mr. Dustin Semore, on today's episode. Dustin, welcome to the program.
Matt, thanks for letting me come. I'm surprised you want me to talk to you, but I'm here.
Well, I was saying fellow sports information director because I feel like once you're a sports information director, you kind of always are one because you're always around sports still. You never really leave it.
Right.
You just might have a different job. So
you remember what happened the last time you and I were behind a microphone together, right?
We won a national championship. Yeah. I mean, Dustin and I have also done some radio stuff for, Dustin does a lot of the radio for Freed-Hardeman Athletics, and I've helped a little bit with that. I let him do most of the talking. He's very talented at that. I'm kind of just chime in here and there. So great to have you on. And we're talking today about the stories behind the stats. Those listeners that might not know exactly what a sports information director does, a lot of the recaps that you see for different events going on for athletics, whatever school you're at, usually it's a sports information director writing those, among a million other things that they're in charge of: stats, game day preparation, the scores table, finding people to work at different events. There's just a long list that we could go through that we wouldn't have time. We could probably have a whole podcast on what the responsibilities of a sports information director are, so we won't get into that today. But I will let Dustin kind of explain a little bit about his background, just so listeners know kind of where he got, where he is today, background experience, some working experience, different things like that. Go ahead and give us a little background about yourself, Dustin.
Well, I love how you always invite me to your classes, your communications classes, to talk about exactly this. And I know that you're hoping, that I talk about all the communications classes that I took, talk about the external internships that I took. So that's not my journey. I have a very, very unique journey. In fact, I don't know of another sports information director who kind of has my journey. My degree is in Bible.
Yeah.
And, I actually started when I graduated high school. I went to Mississippi State. That's where we were living at the time. I was actually a music education major. Yeah. Played tuba in the famous Maroon Band. Of course, that was during the Croom era, so I lost a lot. But my dad actually got a job here at Freed-Hardeman. You took his spot.
Yeah.
He was a speech teacher here at Freed-Hardeman. And so he kind of offered, he looked at the tuition and said, you can stay at Mississippi State and pay out-of-state tuition, or you can go to Freed-Hardeman and not have to pay tuition.
There you go. So, easy choice. You were in also a fraternity, a music fraternity that was pretty well known as well.
I remember Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia. Okay. It is a music, about music. I always tell people, yes, I was in a frat at a state school, but take your Animal House idea, completely turn it opposite. Most of our quote unquote party nights were sitting and watching our friends play Smash Bros, or we'd play Dungeons and Dragons. And I mean, we're music nerds.
Yeah.
And Andy Griffith is a symphonian, Mr. Rogers. I love talking about stuff like that. But I was in Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia, technically still am. What's a symphonian? Always a symphonian.
Right.
But I came here, wasn't sure if I wanted to be a Bible major. My dad is a preacher, grew up with that, wasn't sure if that was the path that I wanted to take. I eventually took a summer job. That's something, the local, the teacher's kids will learn. I took a job at a tiny church out in Leapwood, which people even here, even though it's 30 minutes down the road, don't know Leapwood because if you blink, you miss it. Preached at that church. I mean, it clicked. And so was a Bible major, graduated here in 2014. But as far as the sports go, I actually got started. My roommate at the time, the play-by-play broadcaster for baseball, and was like, hey, do you want to come do color? I was like, I've always thought about that. It should be neat. Why not? Went, did that, loved it. And so I actually started here in the radio station. Looks a lot different from when I was a student here. Was this a production director, was sports director for a while. And then I actually met during that John Armstrong, who was the sports information director at the time, and he is absolutely my mentor. I talk to him almost every day. I did a great job, and I found out what an SID was. It's one of those nobody knows what the sports information
threw you
director,
in the fire.
Yeah. You don't know what a sports information director is. And I'm like, I love sports, but I'm drenched in sweat from walking from the parking lot up here. So I like sports, but I can't play them.
Right.
And so I learned about this SID job. I was like, hey, that's cool, but preacher's got to preach.
Yeah.
And so I graduated in 2014. One of my favorite things about what sports did, John wanted me to help cover volleyball. I knew nothing about volleyball.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that they were using rally scoring at the time. I was still doing the old school, camp style. But graduated in 2014, immediately went to work at a congregation in Alabama, and somebody in that area, it's a small town, everybody knows everybody, knew that I had radio background and asked, hey, do you want to be on the radio and call South Lamar Stallions? Absolutely. So did that for a while, enjoyed it. I still had my finger on sports information, on broadcasting. Then I go to work at a congregation in Arkansas, up in Piggott, Arkansas, and that's about 45 minutes from Crowley's Ridge College, another Church of Christ school. Olivia got to go to school there, finish her degree there. And if you think Freed-Hardeman is small, you should go to Crowley's Ridge College.
Yeah.
150 students total, maybe. And so of the 15 staff members, they're pulling double, triple duty. And so I asked, hey, I have some background with sports information. Do you want some help? Please.
Mm-hmm.
Was
they
the
were
answer.
More than willing to let you help.
Please was the answer. So, I was still preaching full-time and would drive up there for home games and stuff like that, write the recaps and everything. And then at one basketball game, my dad texted me, Henderson's looking for a sports information director.
Yeah.
And, you asked me, I'd always said the only thing that could take me away from preaching full-time is to be the sports information director at Freed-Hardeman University.
Yeah.
Because it's that ministry aspect. And, I applied. It was one of those, I applied just so I can get it off the back of my head. Hey, I applied. I'm not.
See what happens.
Yeah. I don't have a degree in communication. I'm a preacher. I have half a year of part-time experience. And then Coach Estes calls me, and we interviewed. And next thing I know, I'm in Henderson for the national championship of softball.
There you go.
And about to start my 4th year.
Yeah. And you're also preaching at a local congregation in Jackson.
Yeah,
right?
Milan.
Milan, okay.
Preacher's got to preach. That's I went 2.5 years, and I missed it too much.
Yeah.
So I preach at the Cage Church of Christ, just north of Milan. Love it. That was something that was missing in my life. Like I said, preacher's got to preach.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and you do mention this. You do have an interesting journey getting where you are today, but I think that really helps you in your job just to be able to see people in a different way. I think with your ministry background, ministers are constantly looking for the needs of their congregation. I think the same can be true. And me and my wife talked about this when I was a sports information director at a school like Freed-Hardeman. You're working with athletes that have a Christian background, some that do not. Mm-hmm. And so it's a mission field in that way. So talk a little bit about how maybe when you're writing different stories, you have a different probably perception that other sports information directors would due to your ministry background. You're looking at people in a different way than just how they do on the field. You kind of see the personal side of it as well. So talk a little bit about how you go about maybe bringing some of those stories to light when you're doing your writing and just interacting with athletes.
Right. That's something, when I was talking to my dad about coming to this job, he left ministry to go to a technically secular job. It was a teaching job at a school. I asked him, how did he deal with that? And he said, it's a ministry too.
Yeah.
And so I consider this to be a ministry with a very unique mission field.
Yeah.
These student athletes, and I love them to death. And like you said, I don't see them as student athletes. I don't see them as athletes. I don't see them as students. I see them as souls.
Yeah.
And so that's a very unique perspective that I have. And so, I love talking about our devotionals. I love talking about that side of things. And again, that's difficult because some do have that Christian background and some don't.
Yeah.
Which makes those stories my favorite stories to tell are those who I love. Coach Elliott will bring in African. Mm-hmm. He has a pretty good pipeline with Africa, especially Central Africa, of 2 particular athletes that I can think of when I was a student. Came here together from Zimbabwe, didn't care a thing. They would readily tell you they were only here to play soccer.
Yeah.
Didn't care anything about it. And because of Freed-Hardeman, because of what it is, they eventually came to obey the gospel, and they're still strong in their faith. I know baseball players who did the same thing. It's a difficult journey to, I am a secular, I'm the sports information director. People don't want to read a sermon when they open up their recap. They want to read that. So it's a fine line I got to walk to do that.
You mentioned soccer, and I think that's a good transition because soccer is one that we talk a lot about. I help a little bit with soccer, and stat-wise, soccer doesn't always tell the story of what's going on. We always talk about how defenders in particular, you could have a great game, a great match, but the stats aren't going to show it because you might have kept them from scoring so many goals, but they don't really show up on the stat sheet. So a lot of times when you're maybe writing recaps or just like knowing the story behind it, how does that kind of help you in preparing different things for that, knowing a little bit about the athletes going in? How does that help you, especially with these international students where you kind of know a little bit about their story? How does that help a little bit?
That was also something I looked at, and I've noticed that a lot of our on-field captains, a lot of our more vocal people are those international students. Like now currently, Thabo Malaha is one that comes to mind. He is a field general out there. And while he does have, was a leading goal scorer, he's also a leading assist scorer. And he's everywhere on the pitch.
Yeah.
That's one of those things. Like I wish that we could get those trackers, so I could put in there. And that's another one of those things. Put the tracker. He ran 6 miles today in, Tennessee heat, and the defenders, especially if you look at our stat program, shots, saves, cards. That's all you do. And so those defenders aren't going to have any of those. And so that's one of I've got to write down certain things of, they had a really good opportunity here. It's not on the stat sheet, but you got to remember that they were able to divert that. And even if they're not, I know that they're chirping in their people's ears. I love being at practice too, because I can hear them. When I'm up in the press box or even on the court for a basketball game, I'm zoned into my stats programs.
Yeah.
I don't get to really hear what's going on. So I love going to practices, and the fact that the coaches don't do all that much coaching because it's the kids who are making each other better. Iron sharpens iron. So I think I hear that at every practice. Iron sharpens iron, from the Proverbs. And so those are stories I try to tell. I try to, if you read my recaps, they're very objective.
Yeah.
They're very narrative oriented. I try not to fluff things up. I try to, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And sometimes those bigger stories I have to put in there because, again, he had no shots on goal. He had no shots.
Right.
But I know that he helped a lot. So I try to do that. And also, I try to keep in my mind a balance of, okay, the last 6 recaps had this person's name in it 500 times.
Yeah.
Didn't mention this other player at all.
Yeah.
How can I highlight them? Well, I've got a rotator, a headline picture for the story. I like to, if I use Thabo in the headline, I want to have a picture of Thabo.
Yeah.
But we also have our update graphics. And so I purposefully choose on our score update graphics, on our starting lineup graphics, on our game day programs and things. I purposefully choose those other players who aren't going to be mentioned in the stories as often. So I don't want a student athlete to feel, well, he doesn't like me because he doesn't talk about me any.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really have much to talk about because I do stats.
Yeah.
And just because of your position, you don't have them.
Yeah. And, we talk, I've talked in previous episodes about this. And the interesting thing about athletics is more so now with the social media age, there's so much information out there. And the perception that athletes have of themselves, the perception that they have of their abilities is stemmed from what's being said about me in the media. And,
Right.
and in this case at Freed-Hardeman, we don't have as many maybe national outlets. These Division I NCAA athletes probably have a little bit more of these national places talking about them. With Freed-Hardeman, for example, you're kind of the main one that is writing about our school. You're the sports information director. So it does take a little bit of a balance of who am I highlighting? The pictures. A lot of times, if people don't read the article, they're going to see who's on the headline.
Right.
And that's going to influence the athletes in some way or another.
Right.
Was I mentioned? How am I being mentioned? Is it a positive way, negative way? So in a way, you have a way of kind of shifting that narrative.
Right.
Whether we lost 4-0 or not, I contributed. I was able to kind of have a positive outlook on it because I at least, again, playing with a purpose. I had some purpose in this game. It wasn't for a loss.
Right. And, I won't mention the team because I'll get in trouble, but I have been in trouble. A particular coach had said, your articles are too mean.
Yeah.
And, my first response is, I'm just reporting the facts.
Yeah.
I can't really help. I have to tell a story. I can't say they did a great job if they lost 4-0. And so they write things on their bulletin board, on their whiteboard of goals for this game. And they've told me that one of those goals is have a positive recap. Have Dustin write something positive in the recap. And that's awesome. Go for it. I don't want to be your enemy. I want you to like me, but I write what happened.
Yeah. You gotta be, again, like you said, objective in that way. Tell me a little bit about, maybe this is, I know just from my experience as a sports information director, not always a lot of time to do some of the stories we want to do, some of those non-sports related. We're so busy trying to cover 7 or 8 sports at a time that we might not have as much time. Maybe during the summer, this is maybe some more times you're thinking about that. A non-sports related story that you've told that maybe didn't necessarily make a lasting impact nationally, but on you personally, maybe something that really meant a lot to you.
We were talking before we went on air. The things that are more important to me are the stories that I don't tell.
Yeah.
I'm in my office a lot. I always have my door open, and I can hear the student athletes come in, and I can hear them talk about, and we forget, I purposefully will never call them athletes.
Yeah.
They're student athletes. And so I can hear in the background, they're in their coach's office right next to me. They have their door open too. I can hear me and my boyfriend/girlfriend, whomever, we just had a really bad breakup.
Yeah.
Or, I've got this test coming up and it's really bothering me. And then it's game day. That person, if it's basketball, they go 0 for 10 from the floor. They have 6 turnovers. They're doing everything. And from the outsider's perspective, they're having a horrible game.
Yeah.
And you're doing terrible, don't take that shot anymore. But I know these are humans.
Yeah. And
they had a rough day. And just like we have rough days, sometimes that affects our abilities. Obviously I'm not going to get on, write the story, so-and-so was 0 for 10 today because they had a bad breakup. But because of that, I try not to harp on that. That goes back to my care about them. I try not to harp on the fact that, the nation's leading scorer, if it is, went 0 for today. I'm not going to bring that up because I know that story. So sometimes the stories you don't tell are just as important, if not more, than the stories you do tell.
Yeah. Because they read them and they see what's being said about them. And they, if they're already having a bad day, they don't want to hear even more. I was talking to another episode to Matt Cook, and one of the things he mentioned as far as people that teach student athletes and different things, they remember things that the teachers or professors might not even really think about. He mentioned specifically, athletes don't always think about who's the most dynamic speaker. It's how they felt like they cared about them.
Right.
If a professor is more willing to work with a student athlete on something and generally shows that they care about how they excel, not only on the field, but also in the classroom, that sticks with them. And I think the same can be true with the athletic staff as well, with their coaches. If they feel a coach cares about them, they're more willing to work hard for them. They feel like the sports information director has their best interest. And a lot of that goes back to the storytelling aspect, that how they're being portrayed. So why do you think storytelling matters so much in sports information?
It's not just sports information, it's life. People want their stories told. People need their stories told. It's how they're remembered. When we won the national championship, I'm going to bring it up as much as I can because we won a national championship.
Big accomplishment,
of the NAIA Sports Information Directors Association. The president, mailed a replica trophy and had a little letter on there. And I was just like, I'm the SID. They did everything.
Right.
Why do I deserve a trophy? I didn't do a thing. I had a little statement in there that I should have written down, but it was essentially, when they go back to remember what happened, it's your stories that they're looking at. It's your posts that you made that they're looking at and remembering. And so, I have to remember that it's not just what's I'm having to write 500-600 stories a year. And it's easy for me to look over those, since every single game has a recap. Every single game has a pregame. So there's so many stories. It goes over my head and I don't remember it.
Yeah.
But for them, they'll print it out. They'll, like, I know Coach Amanda has the story I wrote when she was hired. She has the newspaper cut out, plastered on her wall of, we all need our stories told.
Yeah.
The most important story, if it didn't get told, If we didn't have Scripture, where would we be? Well, I'm not comparing our, student athletes' lives and their exploits on the court or on the field to Scripture and the gospel, but storytelling is important. That's important to them.
Yeah, and I think some of that too goes back to your background in ministry. I mean, we're here to minister to other people. Again, some of the core values of the NAI, servant leadership, right? That's describes a sports information director. If any other job, you're serving other people throughout your job, just like coaches do with their athletes as well. Anything else that comes to mind talking about sports information directors that you had planned to talk about, maybe we didn't get to, maybe some of the things about your ministry background, how that kind of translates in there. Anything else that we didn't get to you'd like to discuss?
This job is just so everywhere. One of the first questions I always get asked is, what's a typical day like? I've actually had some students on recruit visits, not recruit, like at student athlete recruits, but like admissions recruiting, want to come and talk to me, which is interesting. When I was a student, you didn't even know what an SID was. And now I'm having, Allison Cross and admissions, saying, hey, can this person want to come? They want to talk to it's usually the broadcast person.
Right.
There's so much. There's not a typical day.
Yeah.
And part of that is Coach S is a fantastic AD. He understands. I will be in Facebook groups with other SIDs, and they talk about how their ADs, you have to clock in at 8, you have to clock in at 5. Doesn't matter if you've got a midnight game.
Yeah.
Because there are those days where I'm not home until 1 or 2 in the morning. But Coach Estes understands that and doesn't expect me to be there bright-eyed and bushy-tailed the next day. And I'm thankful for him for that. And it is a completely unique job.
Yeah.
There's so many different aspects. It's not just about writing. It's about the social media. It's not just about the social media. It's about the broadcasting.
Yeah.
It's not just about the broadcasting. And, overarching all of that in my mind, again, I'm very unique in this aspect, is my ministry. Yeah. While I do care about if they win or lose, while I do care about if they're player of the week, I care most about their soul. Because of my ministry aspect, I can relate to that. That's one of the reasons I love being at Freed-Hardeman, is I'm able to talk about that.
Right.
I'm able to invite people to church. And, it's real interesting. Hey, do you want to come hear so-and-so preach? And that's another thing I love about, it's such a unique place here at Freed-Hardeman. Of all of our, coaches are active in their local congregations.
Yeah.
Coach McCutcheon is an elder at Henderson.
Yeah.
Coach Estes is a deacon. Humphrey, Elliott, everybody is active in their congregations.
Yeah.
So that's something you're not going to hear from most SIDs, but that's a big deal to me, a preacher.
For sure. And during my time as a sports information director, there were certain things I really enjoyed, certain things that I struggled a little bit more with. So for me, for example, when I was a sports information director, certain sports I struggled with stats. That's not really your issue. You do well at all that stuff, more so than I did, definitely. I also struggled sometimes with delegating. If something I want to make sure is done, I usually would err on I'm going to try to do that. And then what that causes a lot of time is burnout, because you're trying to do everything that you want. What is one area maybe that you see that you struggle with and have to kind of catch yourself maybe to improve on, with there being so much going on as a sports information director?
That exactly. Delegation. Coach Estes, wanted to give me a cake the other day because I delegated something out to somebody. Unfortunately, that delegation sometimes leads to more work.
Yeah. You got to fix what someone else did.
what somebody else had messed up.
Right.
But it's easy to get that fixed and things like that. But it's difficult for me. This is my baby. This is the sports information. I want to have these high standards, and I know that I mess up on all of those things.
Yeah. Well, if you want to catch Dustin's work, go FHULions.com. It's all over there, Freed-Hardeman's website. He does most of the content for the website, all the stats that you'll see for most of the games, with the exception of maybe a few sports where he can't be 2 places at once. But even then, you're doing something from one place and you're actually statting from another place. So actually probably all the stats are his.
You have seen me.
Yeah.
I will be broadcasting baseball, statting baseball, while also having the video of a softball game up. And I'm inputting softball stats.
There's a lot going on, and until you see it, you don't really appreciate all the different things that go into it. So I will say this from one former SID to another: appreciate the work that you're doing. It does make a difference. I know just from outside looking in now, all the different things you're doing, it's noticed, whether they know that you're the one doing it or not. Someone that used to be in that position knows all the work that's going into all these games. So we appreciate everything that you do for Freed-Hardeman, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I know that summers are a little bit easier getting you in, but I know if I was going to get you in, it needed to be season 2, because during the season, it's harder to get you and the coaches in. So this is the time to do it. So I appreciate you coming on, Dustin.
Thanks for letting me come.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Dustin Semore for being my guest this week. Be sure to listen to this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character and on the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. Join me for our next episode as I talk with Freed-Hardeman Assistant Dean of Emerging and Innovative Programs, Dr. Jared Gott, on the topic of faith and competition. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.